Hey everyone, Nathaniel Gavronsky here, and I am in a hidden gem of Iowa history. I am in Wapello County near the city of Agency. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit about what this place is called, the people who made it significant, and how it has an impact on Iowa today. This is called the Wapello Memorial Park. The reason why that is that Chief Wapello is actually buried here. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit about each one of these individuals that are buried here, but I'm going to show you their grave sites really quickly, just so you can kind of see what they are. Unfortunately, there's a cage here, so you can't get too close to them, but this is Chief Wapello. This is where he is interred. Next to him are some of the relatives of General Joseph Street, who I will get to in a minute. And so these are his offspring. This is General Joseph Street here. He's a really significant person in the development of this area and why it is significant in Iowa history today. Over here is his wife, Eliza Marie Street. Her maiden name was Posey, and I'll get into who that significantly means in a minute. And then over here are more of the grandchildren of Joseph Street, who unfortunately, in this time of history in the 1830s and 1840s, the mortality rate was really high. So it is a sad truth about this time period that infant mortality rate was quite high. So this is the Chief Wapello Memorial Park. Now, Chief Wapello was a Meskwaki Fox Indian who was born in 1887 near what is now Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. By the time he became chief, his tribe had moved down to what is now Wapello, Iowa, in Wapello County, and extended all the way up into the areas of Muscatine County and in the city of Muscatine along the Mississippi River. Now, the time period for this, the reason it's significant is that it's just before the Black Hawk War. Now, the Black Hawk War lasted from April 6th of 1832 until August 27th of 1832. The Black Hawk War was fought over Chief Black Hawk, who felt like he was wrongfully attacked by Americans, and he wanted to regain territory ceded by his tribe to the U.S. government in the Treaty of St. Louis in 1804. Now, 1804 was just a year before what is now Iowa, had an American flag stuck into its soil near Burlington, Iowa. So they were Indians. Because of the Black Hawk War, it made the American government and the American settlers a little uncomfortable with having so many Indians so close by, and it became a belief that you couldn't actually have coexistence, because every so often you would have a bunch of Indian raids, a bunch of people would die, and it just wasn't good. Even though during the Black Hawk War, less than 100 Americans were killed, there's like around 77, where the number of Indians that were killed were nearly 1,000. Because of the Black Hawk War, a Black Hawk Purchase was the ending treaty result of that, and that took place on September 21st of 1832, and it's basically where 6 million acres were ceded along the Missouri River westward into Iowa. It's about 50 miles inward on the edges, about 40 miles in the center. This is roughly at $640,000. It's roughly 11 cents an acre. Now, the significance about this war outside of and moving the Indians is that this actually gave Abraham Lincoln his brief military career. He never saw any combat, but he was in the military, and he did serve during this time. It also put him and future Confederate President Jefferson Davis on the same side of a winning conflict. Jefferson Davis was actually one who was holding Black Hawk captive during the Black Hawk Purchase. So there's a little bit of significance. Joseph Street fought in the Black Hawk War, and this is where he kind of comes into the picture. Joseph Street was born in Lunenburg, Virginia, County, Virginia, on October 18th of 1782. He came to fame when he moved to Kentucky. He became a newspaper man, and he studied law under Henry Clay, and he was partially responsible for uncovering the Aaron Burr conspiracy. If you guys don't know who Aaron Burr was, he was the former vice president who was believed to be conspiring with a foreign power to create a another nation on the American continent. He was also the one who shot Alexander Hamilton in New Jersey while he was vice president. Alexander Hamilton was the former Secretary of Treasury at the time. It's really interesting. People think politics today are bad and crazy. You have no idea what they were like back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Joseph Street married the daughter of a famous Revolutionary War hero, Thomas Posey. He was a senator from Louisiana. He was a state rep in Kentucky, and he was a territorial governor of the state of Indiana. So he was quite well, man. His daughter would have been well sought after by a lot of prosperous and very, very significant men. And Joseph Street was able to win her hand by her father's blessing. So that's quite significant. And this is like, the kind of person that General Street was. Now, General Street knew Chief Wapello from their times in Prairie du Chien. Joseph Street his family was one of the first settlers of the area, and so they knew each other from their days in Prairie du Chien. Now, when the Black Hawk War ended and the Black Hawk Purchase took place, the Indians were told they had to move along the Des Moines River, which ran, south to Missouri up, by where it's now Keokuk, up into Minnesota. So they had to move over to what is now known as Ottumwa. Now, Chief Appanoose was already here, and because Joseph Street was already the agent for the Winnebago tribe, and most of that's already been that uprising and that conflict in the Winnebago tribe had already, kind of calmed down. The Army moved Joseph Street down to form an agency near the Des Moines River. And that's where the town Agency, Iowa, gets its name from, is this original agency. Now, the agencies were they were trading posts. They were army outposts where communications and dealings with the Indians would take place. Joseph Street and his family moved to this exact spot where I'm stating it, and the Army built an agency, a little house here on this location. And he ran this agency until he died on May 5th of 1840. He died of poor health conditions, and that left a lot of Indians really, really distraught. He was known as being a hero to them. He actually lobbied on their behalf. He created what they believed to be just deals, and he was really well respected. Now, during this time period, shortly before that, Chief Wapello, actually not that far from here, hosted the very first Christian sermon and here in the state of Iowa. It was a Presbyterian traveling preacher who happened to be coming through here, and about a quarter mile northeast of here is where the very first Christian sermon took place in the state of Iowa. After Joseph Street's passing, the Indians weren't really willing to sell any more of their land. Chief Wapello was known for saying that this is all the land we have left, and we are too few to conquer more. And sadly, very shortly after that, on March 15th, the Ides of March of 1842, Chief Wapello was, accidentally was killed in a hunting accident near the forks of the Skunk River. So there's a little bit of conspiracy there on just what caused him to lose his life. But before he died, he begged and pleaded that he would be buried next to his white father, Joseph Street. And you can see I'm standing by Wapello's grave now, and where the flag is Joseph Street. So he got his wish. He was able to be buried close to his white father, Joseph Street. Now, once Joseph Street dies, his son-in-law, Major John Beach, takes over the agency. And this agency continues to run because this is a government institution that's run by the U.S. military. And this is where they keep having meetings and treaties and debates on what to do with the area and with the Indians. Again, the U.S. government has already decided that they don't want the Indians around here. The settlers don't feel safe. There's too many of them that are being killed to random raids, and it's just believed that it's not possible to have them coexist. So it is decided that they're going to have a meeting, and they're going to buy the rest of the territory. Now that Wapello was gone, there's no really strong voice on the Indian side to prevent the territory from being sold off to the Americans. So on this site, on October 11th, 1842, at the agency, with Major John Beach being the secretary and organizing this event, the territorial governor of Iowa at the time, which was John Chambers, attended this meeting. This lasted a week. He attended in a brigadier general's uniform. He wanted to impress the Indians. Now the Indians were here in all their best too. Like all the chiefs in the area were here that were still alive, and all the major players in the Indians. Also, people that were here during this time was Captain James Allen. He was the doorkeeper for this ceremony. You had Colonel Davenport and Major Sanford. They were representing the American Fur Company and their interest here at this treaty. And you had Mr. Leclerc, the person who founded Davenport, named it after his friend Colonel Davenport, and who the namesake for Leclerc, Iowa is, who was Leclerc was actually founded by Colonel Davenport. It's kind of funny how they just traded founding cities named after their friends. They were all here. Leclerc was the translator. A lot of the Indians, don't forget, this was part of the Louisiana Purchase. A lot of the Indians spoke French. That's kind of how the Des Moines River got its name, is that the Indians it was believed the Indians were speaking French when they were actually speaking their native language. And so the English travelers, this is the River of the Monks. So that's a lot of Iowa names. Actually, even the flag, you see, there's really close to the French flag. So there was a lot of French spoken in the area, and so Leclerc was a translator along with a few others. So this meeting took place for over a week, and it was decided that for a cost of $800,000, which is roughly 12 cents an acre, the largest part of Iowa was going to be ceded by the Sauk and the Fox Indians to the United States government. This allowed Iowa to really become a territory outside of just saying so on a map. So this takes place in 1842. Don't forget that, within 5 years, the state's going to become a state, not just a territory. And the territory had already been fighting the Honey War, and it hadn't even been settled yet in the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of things going on in Iowa at this time. So the Indians are told they have to immediately move over towards what is now Knoxville. But Article 8 of the treaty, this was very important to all the Indians, is that this agency, which was no longer going to be needed, which was government property, was going to be, dilapidated, lost. The Indians demanded that this immediate area where I'm standing, to be given to Joseph Street's widow, Eliza Marie, and his estate, and to maintain the graves that are behind me now. This was very important to the Indians because Joseph Street mattered to them, and this is the kind of two different cultures, two different ethnicities, everyone working together to try to do this. And I think that's significant about people are able to do this anywhere, and this is one of those relationships among two different groups of people having a long-term impact on future generations. And so this Street family was given this property, paid for by the Indians out of their money, which they were paid in 1,000 boxes of silver. And they had to pay all their debts, and for the remaining amount is where they paid their fellow tribesmen from. So after the Indians they had to move to Knoxville and westward, and within 3 years they all had to move to Kansas. And the Iowa legislature later on actually passed a law allowing some of those tribes to come back. And the Meskwaki settlement in central Iowa is that group of people, and that settlement still exists to this day. James Allen, who was the doorkeeper at this week-long event, immediately, since the Indians were being moved out of this area, moved further west and up the Des Moines River, the U.S. Army needed a new agency, obviously, because this one was no longer going to be needed, to conduct their business with the native tribes. So they sent him up the Des Moines River to the forks of the Raccoon and Des Moines River to found another Fort Des Moines, which is not the first, but it was the final incarnation of a Fort Des Moines. That fort lasted from 1843 till 1846, when it was no longer needed. The state became a state. The city of Des Moines formed and founded itself from the original fort. So there's a lot of significance that happened from James Allen from this location. James Allen actually would continue to work for the U.S. military. He was given the commission of lieutenant colonel and is the first officer to be buried at Fort Leavenworth Cemetery in Kansas. He helped a lot with recruiting Mormons to the U.S. Army during the Mexican-American War. Major John Beach, who stayed in agency for the rest of his life, died here in 1874. He's buried here in agency. The family stayed within the area. John Chambers, who was the lieutenant governor, the territorial governor at the time, his term ended in 1845, leading up to Clark taking over. After his term here in Iowa, he continued negotiating with Indian tribes and moved to Kentucky, where he died in Bourbon County, Kentucky in 1861. After that, let's see here. No, 1852, my apologies. He died in 1852 in Bourbon County, Kentucky. Davenport was actually murdered on July 4th of 1845 in his home in Illinois. His family left and then came back later on to find him severely beaten. He wanted to stay home for the celebrations. He survived long enough to make a police report. They did find the bandits who robbed him and beat him, and they were convicted and hung for their crimes against Davenport. Leclerc, who was the translator, he lived in Davenport, and during the 1857 panic that was grabbing hold of the United States, he actually guaranteed the deposits of the local banks in Davenport. Now the banks did not fail because of the panic, but because of other unforeseen circumstances. But Leclerc still honored his commitment to back the deposits, and this probably hastened his demise. A lot of his wealth was taken from this, and in what was it, September 25th of 1861, he passed, and his family were given a great honor throughout the city of Davenport for his service to the citizens of the city, protecting all their finances. Let's see here. Yeah, that's pretty much, Allen was in Des Moines, Beach was in agency. So that's kind of what happened to afterwards with all the people. But this location, if it wasn't for the people here with Wapello and Street being able to become friends and to have significance in making events and meetings here, and the purchases, Iowa as it is today would be very different. And so these significant times in history I want to try to preserve. And I preserve those moments in history by telling people about where they are and how they can experience them for themselves. Because even though buildings and monuments can wear away, the spaces still exist. And it's up to us to remember them and to show significance to the locations. And to remember that great people, for their times, did great things, and we should judge them upon their own times and for the greatness that they did to give us who we are today, the world that we live in today, which is significantly better than what it could have been otherwise. And so that's why I'm doing these videos. I want people to take pride in their history, learn from the history's mistakes, and try to make sure those things don't happen, those bad things don't happen in the future. But we can work on creating more good things in the future by learning from our history. These two people, this Indian and this Army general, became friends that transcended past death, and I think that's a significant moment in history for everyone in Iowa and everyone in this country to remember. So this is Nathaniel Gavronsky from Agency, Iowa, saying thank you. Stay healthy, stay wealthy, and stay wise. And as always, stay classy, Iowa.